Lisa Tamati here, and welcome back to Pushing the Limits. It's fantastic to have you again. This week I have a wonderful guest, my friend Guy Lawrence from Australia, who is an expert in meditation and demystifying meditation and using the language of neuroscience. So he gets rid of all the woo-woo and gives you all the real relevant information about why meditation is really important. We talk about altered states of consciousness. We even get into some quantum physics, and he's a fantastic guest. So I'd love you to check out the show. Now, before we get underway, you can reach out to me, lisa@lisatamati.com, if you've got any questions around running, fitness, mindset, any of the topics that we've discussed today. You can find me there. You can also see us on our website at lisatamati.com. Now, we just wanted to let you know too that we've got a live weekend retreat coming up on the 31st of August and 1st of September in Havelock North in the North Island of New Zealand, and we would love you to come and join us. You can head over to lisatamati.com to find out more about that running retreat. And yeah, take some time please to rate and review the show if you find this of help. The content that we produce, we really appreciate it. It helps the show get a lot more exposure the more reviews and ratings we get, and we love sharing this great content with you and having wonderful guests on, so I really appreciate you doing that. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention before we get underway is that we have a 7-day free trial running on our Running Hot Coaching online run training club. Now, it only costs $5 a week to be a part of this club, but you don't even have to risk the $5. Come and join us, see what it's all about, find out how our holistic run training sessions work, all our programs, get access to all the different programs from 5Ks right up to ultra marathon. So that's the 7-day free trial. You can find that at runninghotcoaching.com or just drop us a line. Right, now over to the show. Well, hi everybody, Lisa Tamati here at Pushing the Limits. It's fantastic to have you all back again. And today I have my friend Guy Lawrence all the way from Australia with me on Zoom today. So how are you, Guy?
I'm magnificent, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, Guy and I have actually connected through a mutual friend, Kerwin Ray, who's huge in Australia and soon to be huge worldwide, I think, and both learned a lot from Kerwin. So thanks, Kerwin, for that, if you happen to listen to this. And I was on Guy's show a couple of weeks ago, the Guy Lawrence podcast, which I highly recommend you guys go and listen to. And today, Guy and I are just going to be chewing the fat and having a bit of a fireside chat about everything around meditation, around consciousness, about Guy's past and all the specialist knowledge that Guy's collected over a very long time. And this guy really knows an awful lot about an awful lot. So I'm interested to see where this conversation goes. So welcome to the show, Guy, and thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I'll be interested to see where it goes to. I find the deeper we go, the more tangents it goes off to. So, yeah, hit me with whatever you want and I'll do my best if I have an answer for it.
Yeah, no, I love just talking to super interesting people that have achieved a lot. So, Guy, give the listeners who don't know you a bit of a background on who you are, where you live, what you've done in your life.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you can tell, I have a very tropical accent. I'm from Wales, all the way from the UK. And similar to, the guys from New Zealand, very passionate about rugby. I mean, I grew up, as soon as I could pick up a rugby ball, I had one in my hand. And for the next 15 years, from the age of 6 till I was 21, rugby was my religion. That's all I knew. How much beer I could drink and how I could play rugby on the weekend. And that was going back quite a while back, over 20 years ago now. But, but it's interesting what even led me to this point today. Even back then, there was like this itch I couldn't scratch inside of me ever since I was a kid. And I always didn't know what it was. There was like this pull, this yearning. And it was just the strangest thing, Lisa. And from that, I couldn't settle. I couldn't settle in relationships. I mean, I quit my rugby. I couldn't settle in jobs. And I just kind of was always a seeker and a searcher. It was really interesting. But through my 20s, that seeking and searching made me very unhappy. And I thought I was kind of broken to a degree. Mm-hmm. And I realized, looking back, I was only having this conversation yesterday, looking back, that I kind of constructed almost stories and beliefs about myself and my self-worth and who I was and what I was doing and it always denied, by having those stories, it stopped me from actually living to my potential.
Yeah.
So, right.
Very common problem, I'd say.
Yeah, very. But I couldn't see the wood through the trees. And because I left school at 15 and I didn't really have any qualifications, and I ended up being a plumber. But I saw enough to see that out. I kind of was looking around in the world thinking, has everyone gone mad? Like, everyone doesn't seem that happy. They go to jobs, they get mortgages, they get in, they settle for things. And I wasn't, my reality wasn't confirming seeing a lot of happiness. It was a struggling part of Wales. It was in a recession. It was just tough. And I just thought that was the way life was. So because I couldn't see happiness there, I didn't know where my happiness was. So I just went traveling and just was like a nomad, to be honest with you. And by the time I got to early 30s, I was getting really, I was suffering from it at a deep level, but I didn't have any communication skills. I didn't know how to express my feelings. I'm a bloke, and what do? You just suck it up and get on with it. And
the rugby boy.
Exactly. My self-worth in my teens was all about how physical can I be on a rugby field and hurt somebody else within the rules of the law. Like, it was, and then how many beers could I drink? Totally. That was, and, but there was something in me that I actually think it was, I look at it all as a blessing now, because that part of me that couldn't settle, I guess it allowed me to be free. So in essence, when I was able to shift my story, my paradigm from feeling sorry for myself, lack of self-worth, lack of belief, and be able to flip the switch, which I'm sure we'll get into today, and really start to go on a journey of self-discovery and find my purpose and align my head with my heart, if you like, and actually start to break down the old conditioning. I realized that the fact that I didn't have responsibilities and children and a mortgage, and even though I was in debt at the time when this was all going on in my 30s, I was like, wow. And I was able to change my story.
Yep.
And then once I changed my story, it changed the way I perceived myself and saw myself. And then it was game on. And from there, I actually started a business supplement company back in 2010, which was a long journey even to that point, a natural protein superfood. I'd been working with people with cancer at the time.
Wow.
Which was really interesting. Yeah, so I was a fitness trainer. I'd emigrated to Australia, and it was like the last roll of the dice. By the time I got to my 30th birthday, I'd been accepted as residency for Australia, and I just thought, I'm going to go. I don't know where to go, but it was a clean start.
Yeah.
And I got involved in the fitness industry, and I was working at the Sydney UTS University down at Central Station there, and these chain of events started to happen where I was really getting fascinated and interested around health and fitness, and quite quickly I was seeing what I'd been taught as a fitness trainer and actually what I was seeing in the trenches were very different. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time my beliefs started to get shattered, and because once I started working with people who had cancer, I was kind of learning from a rogue charity that were saying, we need to start looking at a Paleolithic diet. We need to start cutting out all the processed foods, all the sugars. Yeah. We need to get them actually moving and weight training to build muscles, to help with the glycogen uptake. And, because they were saying, sugar, glucose can feed cancer. There was all these conflicting things, but I'd never heard of any of this before. And this was like in 2007 and 8, and I was fascinated. And then with working and seeing hundreds of people who had cancer, it was reaffirming my reality. I didn't need a science paper to go, this is what's happening, because I was seeing it with my own eyes. And people, people were benefiting from it. It wasn't all rosy, and it also started teaching me about how precious life was, and how much we really need to value each day. And that was probably a big tipping point for me at that point, where I started to drop my own stories and drop my own I was able to put more I don't know, more gratitude started to come into play, and more actually appreciation for what I had at the time.
Yeah, but I think when you're faced with people who are facing cancer or death or any of those or disabilities, it really whacks your world, eh? It sort of like makes you wake up and stop complaining and starting to realize the power that you have as a person. Like, I really believe that we have so much power that is untapped within each of us. Me still, you still, and most other people are just not even scratching the surface of what we're actually capable of if we can free ourselves from the cages that we've built as young people or as children, or from things that have happened to us, or our culture that we were born into, or our religion that we were born into, has created these cages that limit our thinking and help us orientate in the world, but then become very limiting for us when it comes to reaching our potential and overcoming problems and seeing things from a new perspective. And this takes a little bit of maturity. And I know, our frontal cortex doesn't really develop until our early 20s. And I think for blokes, it's a little bit longer, to be honest. Maybe.
I wonder if it develops at all for us blokes.
Yeah, I've got a brother who's 48 now. I think it's still developing, but we are growing and changing. And who we were as children, or who we were when we were powerless and we adopted some of these beliefs, we no longer are. And this is something that I'm passionate about teaching, is that, that little kid that was told they were dumb at school because they were at 7 or 8 year old level and they couldn't do their spelling bee or whatever, is not anything to do with the 30-year-old standing in front of you or the 40-year-old, and that you can let go of that crap and start to really rearrange things in your head. So how did you progress? Because, the rugby, the tough guy image, to starting to develop into who you've become. So you've started this nutrition company, which was it originally aimed at helping people with cancer who are fighting cancer?
No, the concept came from that because the people that set it up, they weren't, because they had them weight training, they wanted to increase their protein intake, but the cancer patients would be emailing them and say, can I use this protein, can I use that protein to help, like a shake, and they were looking at the ingredients and saying, stay away, this is going to not be detrimental, this is going to inhibit you. And yeah, I'm sitting in a fitness industry which is supposed to represent health. Yeah. And I'm thinking, is this really healthy? Taking this chemical concoction of protein, and that was the industry back then. And this kind of radical idea of, well, can't we just create something natural and dress it up as, so it's actually a raw protein food. So it's actually food and fiber and nutrients and all the vitamins, minerals and stuff like that. So there was naturopaths involved in that, and there was a formulator conceptualized. And then I just started saying, look, I'd like to distribute it at the university. And I think I'd like to see if it was almost like my testing ground. Wow. And within 12 months, I was selling a lot of this within the uni. I had the staff on it.
How did you get it formulated? Did you go to a laboratory, or how do you do something like that?
So because it was only food, it wasn't necessary. Once you start playing around with other things, then that's when FDA and all that kind of things come in. But manufacturers, it's just been able to find the right manufacturer and the right people that are already in place that are willing to put something together for you.
Right.
See? So then I was being able to just sell that within the university, and then there was traction starting to happen. And then I met my business partner in 2010. I was very inspired by this point. I had no clue what I was doing on how to get it out there to the world. Yeah. And that's when Tim Ferriss and Gary Vaynerchuk and these guys started to become my kind of role models. I was reading their books back then, and I took to the internet, and I ended up starting up a podcast. And myself and my business partner Stu at the time, we formed a company called 180 Nutrition, and we just started taking it to the online space. And CrossFit was taking off at the time.
Yeah,
it was slowly coming in, and I was they kind of had a really strong ethos. And we just grew, and we just kept putting energy into it. And from that, by 2014, we were up for the Telstra Business Awards. We were a multi-million-dollar company.
Wow.
And it was kind of this really raw context, because it was the first time. There's a huge story. Let me just I got something bouncing on my screen. There's a huge context, because I found myself even prior to the start 180 Nutrition, I was yearning and searching, and I ended up trading the stock market, and while I was a fitness trainer, because I had this belief in my head that I could make money and then go and do what I loved.
Yeah.
But I realized I had to do what I loved, and then the abundance would follow. and because I'd been so moved by what I was seeing with the cancer patients and helping them, cut a very long story short, I wanted to bring this product then into the mainstream, just everyday folk, and the thing took off, and it was a huge lesson for me about really following my heart and my intuition, because I know Kerwin Raven speaks about the Mack truck, the feather, and the brick. At different levels, you might hear a whisper and it feels like a tickle. Yeah. And then you might get a few rocks in your head from the universe saying, wake up. And then one day, if you keep ignoring it, a Mack truck will run you over, and you might survive or you might not.
Yeah.
So I was aware of these things. So when I started to just actually intuitively listen to myself and not think too much about it, I couldn't see the way. I couldn't see the how.
Yeah.
I just had a big enough why.
Wow.
And it was really powerful. So I just kept going. And I had nothing to lose. Like I said, I had no responsibilities. I had no excuse.
Lucky in that respect. Yeah, you had the time and the space to actually go and invest in learning and develop on the fly.
On the fly. And I was prepared to, honestly, because I was in such a predicament in life anyway, where all my ships were burned. I was just ready to go. I would have gone homeless, honestly, to make it happen. Like I genuinely felt that strongly about it. And it was with that conviction and fully surrendering, something beautiful came of it.
Yep.
And it allowed me to explore. Yeah, it allowed me to start to, and because of the podcast, which we started back in, I think it was 2012, when podcasting wasn't so popular back then, our podcast took off again fairly quickly because of the success of the company. And, we were achieving a lot of downloads each month. And that allowed me to start reaching out to some of my heroes, some of the popular names. I just started going, I'm just going to see if they come on. And I got to know a lot of people through that.
Heck yeah. You've got a list of people on your, even your now podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big names that I'm just going, holy heck, how the hell did you get them on?
But it's 10 years in the making, really, even though Let It In and what I do now is only 18 months in. Mm-hmm. I got 10 years of wisdom behind me to know what to apply and bring in. But what it was doing, it was really starting to open me up to the work of the self. And terms like quantum physics started coming up, and terms even like neuroscience. I didn't even know what neuroscience was for 10, 15 years ago, and not that I'm a scientist or anything, but it was a language that I started to look at and hear and learn. And because of my experiences from this transition from moving from my head to my heart, there was a lot of things being said that I actually got because I had already embodied the work.
Yep.
Unknowingly. And then all of a sudden, here was a blueprint and a language, and terms like meditation kept coming up as well, and coming from an attitude of gratitude. And before, they were just philosophy.
Yeah, they were just quotes in a book.
Yeah, and I was already starting to read books like Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra, and I've been to a Tony Robbins seminar and Eckhart Tolle and all these guys, and all of a sudden there was a shift in my own awareness, in my own consciousness. And from that, I kept delving in. But because I started delving in even deeper, what I noticed was myself was unraveling even more. Mm-hmm. So who I thought I'd been and what I told myself, there's just layer upon layer upon layer. And it kind of seems even strange to hear that if it's for the first time. But as you start looking within, which I think is the greatest journey of all, I was starting to unravel even more. And from that unraveling, I realized by about 2016 that I wasn't happy in 180 Nutrition anymore. And that was a big deal for me because it was a lot of my identity was wrapped up in it. The success was wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
We were in this partnership, and I felt I needed to go in a different direction, and then I had to process all that. But over a 2-year period, by the end of, beginning of 2018, I had made a very conscious decision and spoke with my business partner Stu, and we parted ways amicably, and he continued with 180, and I stepped down and sold out to embark on the new journey. But I knew, because I was feeling the rocks coming though. I was having the tickles and the rocks, and then it was like, this time, if I don't act now, I know a Mack truck is going to come. And what have I learned from it almost coming and taking me out before? So this time I needed to be wiser and trust this part. And if I was going to teach this work, then I had to really walk the talk. Yeah. So I just sold out and
left it
and just started again. And it was terrifying and exciting. It was everything rolled into one. And I was like, I just didn't know how I was going to do it again, but I knew why, and I knew I had to go that direction. I knew it was like over there.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to try and draw upon all my skill sets to start.
So that's about like being courageous and going all in and following your heart, even though when you look at it from an economic standpoint or from a safety standpoint or your family or whatever, then often these situations and decisions are very hard to make, to walk away from things. And I think so many people settle because where they are is safe. The mortgage is being paid, the bills are being paid, the wife or the husband's happy. You might be miserable in what you're doing, but it's very hard to break out of that cage that you're in again, and to go off into the unknown, and to leave, especially when you've been very successful, to leave something big behind and then go on into the next part of your life, the next adventure. So that takes a whole lot of courage to do that.
It does. And the one thing I want the point I'd love to get across as well is, for me, like, courage is almost like a muscle. So I could only bench press so much courage, if you like, like only so much weight. So as long as it's almost like like they say, you find on the other side of your comfort zone is freedom. So I would find my edges, and I knew how much I could bench press, if you like, in courage, in terms of how far am I going to leap out, because I have leapt out too far before, and then I couldn't handle it, and I kind of came crawling back like battered bruised. I think, I'm not going to go that courageous that so soon. So it's about knowing what you can handle. But if you live a very comfortable life and you haven't had, there's no pressure, no diamond, right? Like, it's like if you're constantly avoiding the difficult situations and the difficult things, if something gets presented for you that you're not ready for, it can almost feel like your life can collapse, because we're not used to dealing with it. So in other words, what I really started to learn to do, and what this work does, it keeps you sharp. It's almost like you get your courage fitness going, and once you start aligning the head with the heart and looking at this, you can start to find your edges and lean in. I always say you just got to lean in. And it was through that leaning in and doing the work, when this bigger courageous step needed to happen, I was ready. I was prepared. I'd almost like been training for my mission or whatever it was. Even though I didn't know what it was, then I could step in. It wasn't like, I'm just going to throw it all away and boom.
It wasn't an impulsive step to just drop everything because you'd had a bad day.
That's right.
Decided to which most of us have those days on a weekly basis, where we go, I'm going to chuck it all because I had some bad situation happen or whatever, and you want to chuck it. This is different. This is a planned escape or change of direction. How do you start to listen? Because I'm very big into listening to the heart, listening to the gut, the fact that there's neural tissue in our hearts and our stomachs, and that the mind-body connection is so deeply integrated. And I think you're with me on this side of things. How do people get out of their logical thinking heads and start to listen to what their body is saying, their heart, their stomach, their not just the prefrontal frontal cortex,
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of us are in this logical and trying to overthink and analyze and work things out. And a lot of these big decisions in life are very much jumps into, the unknown, because there's a lot of uncertainty. How do you start to listen with your heart? How do you start to listen with your stomach, get that gut feeling for something and that intuition? I really think it's a real thing. It's not a hairy theory. It's I think I mentioned to you last time, I'm reading a book called The Molecules of Emotion, which I'm telling everybody to read. It's an awesome book. And, that there are receptors for all our hormones all over our bodies, from our lung tissue to our sexual organs, to our heart, to our stomachs. And these are where, a lot of the memories are stored in different parts of our bodies. And very complicated science that I'm certainly not qualified to regurgitate, but the interconnectedness, this is written by a top scientist who talks about the interconnectedness of the brain with the body, and that it's not like the medical world is very much, from here up or from here down. This is very much a connected piece, and we're not just a piece of machinery. We are much more than just machines,
Totally.
And that a lot of our emotions, a lot of our intuition and all those things are actually real. They're just, we've got to learn to tap into them and listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that and I've got to get that book, by the way. It's the third time I've heard it. I think I heard it from you before, but Molecules of Motion.
Yeah.
Look, there's a few things that spring to mind. First of all, you got to remember that most of Westerners these days haven't been brought up, raised, or taught to listen to your intuition. And so if you think of things, if you're not trained in a skill set, then it can feel like a very foreign concept, and you've got a bunch of belief systems getting in the way. Now, us Westerners are constantly distracted, and we are constantly running from the fight or flight. We're generally in a stress response very often, and we are sending a very different signal to the body when we're in that place. Now, I would challenge most people to say, some people can say, oh, I'm not that stressed, but the stressed environment of the body can feel so familiar that you've been running on the hormones of stress for so long. That's just how you know it to be.
Yeah.
It's almost like people don't know what it's like not to have sugar in their diet, because they've had sugar in their diet their whole life. And it's really interesting concept. So the first thing we've got to be aware of is that we're constantly distracted, and we're normally constantly in a stress state. And I would challenge anyone, if they go on holiday and they find themselves shutting down after a few days, then they clearly were in a stress state beforehand, So
you see it when you sit down and relax.
Yeah, when you finally slow down, right? Yeah. So for me, I start to become aware of that. And I also think about then, well, what controls the autonomic nervous system, right? And what can start to get us back into from sympathetic into parasympathetic? Because as far as I'm concerned, once you're in a more relaxed state, you're then able to sort of see the situations and things for how they are.
Yes.
And from that place, you can start to tune into feeling more. Mm-hmm. So where do we generally start to want to learn to feel from? Now, for me, what I've learned, and the Heart Math Institute, I've got a lot of studies around this.
So I've heard that one before.
Yeah. Well, the heart influences the autonomic nervous system as well as the brain. So instead of perceiving a situation, so what we normally do, we normally look from external, and we're looking through our five senses mainly. That's interpret information, and then the nervous system becomes a filter, and then we send a signal to the body. Mm-hmm. So we'll look at a situation and go, that equals this. I'm going to have an automatic stress response because I've done it so many times. Everything's going on at a nanosecond, right?
Yeah.
And then we send in the signal to the body fires in a certain way, hence you fire and wire in a certain way, and you end up in a stress state. Now, so what about if we stopped waiting for the external circumstance to happen, and we started training that nervous system from the inside out? So then we could start sending a different signal to the body that would allow us and help us to start to perceive situations differently to the way we've subconsciously trained ourselves our whole lives.
Wow, that's gold.
right? So why not then let's do that, hence gratitude. So what about if I start having a practice daily, because I know this is a skill set, I want to start developing my intuition. What about if I know the heart influences the autonomic nervous system just as much as the way I'm perceiving it? And then I actually start sending a signal from the heart out to the nervous system instead.
Yeah.
And that signal, now, interestingly enough, with a heart and brain connection, obviously we've got the gut, the heart, and the brain with the nervous system running all the way through to each one. Yep. The heart actually sends 80 to 90% of the signals to the brain. Not the other way around. Now, if you're willing to close your eyes for a moment, tell your body it's safe, get rid of all the distractions, and bring your awareness and start to breathe in and out the heart and start generating a different emotion, an elevated emotion, then when you generate an elevated emotion, like love or gratitude, love we know produces oxytocin. That's a hormone that's actually going to send a very different signal to the body, which creates a chemical, right? So you're then creating a different feeling. So why not start training the body to chemically produce different hormones, create different feelings that counteract the stress states? So if you're willing to start practicing that daily, hence it's a great place to start with meditation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then you're going to start sending a different signal. So as you stop distracting yourself, as you turn your phone off and stop looking at it 85 times a day, I think the average time is, or 5 hours on Facebook, or everything is constantly distraction. We don't allow ourselves to be and feel and just honor where we're at.
We're human beings, not human doings.
Exactly. So to help develop our intuition, then we need to develop it. We need to start practicing the skill set. And what, like, I was fortunate because I was quite a feeler anyway. I trusted that feeling. Like, it's shown that the heart can produce an electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
And the electromagnetism is 60 to 90 times more powerful than what the brain produces.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So that means we can actually have a field of energy. And so all energy, all electricity, all electromagnetic field, all carries information. Okay. And that information is just interpreted differently to the mind, because the mind needs intellect and we need a language. And each word that is broken down that we've learned over the years carries a certain meaning to us and then an interpretation. But that doesn't mean we can't learn through other information. It's just receiving it in a different format. And the words that we learn, we normally have meaning to it. That means there's normally a charge behind it as well from the words of how we perceive them to be.
Yeah.
Now, with the heart, you can actually end up generating an electromagnetic field up to 3 meters in diameter. Yeah. So as you start to develop this and this field of information that can start to come out, and you can start to feel it. If you do this work long enough, you can really dial in. And then all of a sudden, that field is communicating with other fields from other people. And then all of a sudden, there's a knowingness that starts to come through instantaneously. And that's where intuition's starting to come from. Now, if you look at quantum physics, where they've done a lot of tests, the heart math, again, have done a lot of tests. I'm going to go deep for a sec, but I might as well. I'm on a roll.
Yeah, I love this stuff. This is exactly what I'm into right now.
Where they found that they took 2 photons of light and basically made them kiss, hug, and make love to each other, and then separate them. And they separated them over a certain distance. And when they tickled one photon of light, the other one responded at the exact same time.
Wow.
Even though they were miles apart. So that meant they had to be connected in some way beyond our current space and time. Because normally to send information, it has to cover a certain amount of space to get from A to B, and it takes a certain amount of time to get there.
Yeah.
But because it was happening instantaneously, it meant that it's actually connected beyond our space and time.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to get into what's known as the quantum field. Or I had NASA physicist Tom Campbell on my podcast last year, and he called it 0-point consciousness or 0-point field. So then you got a question. Then we're actually swimming in this field of energy that makes up the entire universe,
and
which is...
We are influencing that energy with our energy.
Correct, but it's connected, but it's beyond our current paradigm of 3D reality.
Yeah, we can't see it. We can't.
But it's there.
Yeah.
It's there. You know, award-winning scientist Nassim Haramein, who I'm trying to get on my podcast at the moment, look at his work, and it's unbelievable. Like, these guys are like Einstein. Yeah. So the way I start to see it now is that if we're connected to this field of energy, that's when we have downloads. That's when we have these spontaneous moments of trusting. So as we develop our own heart, our own awareness, our own feeling, our own intuition, there's this connection that starts to come more, and you start to trust that more, and that relationship comes more. You know, and that's what I do at my retreats. We give people enough space over 3 days, and it'll be 5 days over next year as well, where we can get people out of their heads. Yeah. We can get them to drop deep, and you start to get into these altered states, and you really start to connect to this unified field, and then information starts to come through, and it's quite profound. Yeah. And when you have an experience like that, it changes the game, because you start to question everything, but it also helps eradicate a lot of fundamental fears. And if people, like I did, I always used to make decisions based upon fear and this restriction, and batten down the hatches and hold back. But then it's like I'm holding my back from my own potential. But as I learn to connect and flourish and trust and lean in and actually make decisions, trusting this intuition, trusting this feeling, even though it challenges my own beliefs, and stuff starts coming up. And that's where what I teach becomes pivotal, because meditation is all about metacognition, which means being the observer, and how we start to handle that. And then once we start to overcome ourselves, we can learn how to connect deeper with ourselves, and lean in even more. And then eventually you end up, this becomes your new paradigm, your new the way of life. And you look back and you go, wow, I can't even remember my old self. Yeah. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. So what would you say to people who are listening to this and going, well, that sounds a bit hairy-fairy to me, and a bit spiritual and a bit out there? Because this is, like, you're talking quantum physics, you're talking, well, I've been talking about, you know, neuroscientists and psychoneuroimmunologists, and these are very, very extremely bright people who are bringing these theories that have been around often for a long time in the Eastern philosophies and Chinese philosophies, and actually what I'm seeing in the research and the readings that I'm doing is that a lot of the stuff that they've been talking about for thousands of years, and they know to work in the Eastern philosophies, has actually now come full circle, that the scientists are actually proving that actually, yeah, there is this invisible energy field, there is these connections, you know, the quantum physics and all of that sort of stuff is really starting. The Heart Math Institute, these are very extremely bright people, beyond what we, you know, anything we could ever understand, but they're actually starting to say, now this is not hairy-fairy rubbish, this is actually real science, and that things are happening on a actual cellular level. You know, I think that's, for me, that's explained a whole lot more. And I don't have the vocabulary yet, because I have only been studying this area for a short time, to be able to explain it to people. But I can feel it in my own body when I do things right. Yeah. I'm, you know, very much like, I've heard for years that meditation's good for me, right? And I'm like, I totally agree, but I'm too busy, you know, and I go for a run and that's my meditation. And yes, that is to a certain degree a certain type of meditation. But I now understand that it's really important to quiet the brain, especially if you're you're like me, you're constantly on the edge of performance. You're trying to up your performance all the time. You're busy as hell. You've got a billion people pulling at you and a billion messages coming in, and you know you're dealing with a couple of companies and life's chaos. And to find that quiet time, what I've found even just in the last couple of weeks since we've spoken is just a little bit more joy creeping in, and a little bit more gratitude creeping in, and a little bit more waking up with a, let's go to work, rather than, shit, I've just woken up and I've got to go Groundhog Day,
Yeah.
which things have been a bit Groundhog Day for a while when you're fighting to, keep things going and afloat. And you start to lose that joy that you had when you were a young person. Starts to come back when you start doing this meditation, when you start to understand the nervous system and you were talking about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Let's explain that to people for starters. What is the difference, and why does meditation and deep breathing and these sort of things help the parasympathetic nervous system, and what is it actually doing on a mechanical level, if you like?
Well, I mean, the simplest way to look at it, you got fight or flight, or rest or repair. And we constantly, most of us are in fight or flight, and we can have all sorts of stress, chemical, physical, and emotional. And there's what's called an allostatic load, meaning we can have stress from not eating the right foods, for instance. We can have stress from the gut. There's another loading point because our gut isn't healthy. We can have stress from the chemicals that we use as to put on our skin or the products we use. We could have stress from a work situation that is not going well. There's another stress, or we're struggling because we're financially hardship. There's another stress. And all of a sudden, we've got this load that continues to put pressure on us.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. And we are constantly perceiving the lens of the world through that load, through that fight or flight. So we can only focus on any given situation or any one time. Generally, we focus on how we feel. And we see things the way we feel that they are. They're not necessarily that way. So we end up having a very biased lens. Now, when you're in rest and repair, everything's much more open. You're allowing the nervous system shuts down. If you look at Bruce Lipton's got an amazing lecture online. Bruce Lipton wrote The Biology of Belief, an amazing book. And if you think of it from a cellular level, if you're in fight or flight and you're a community of 75 trillion cells, that community is in fighting mode ready. It's battening down the hatches. So everything is actually closed off. And when things are closed off, ready for fighting, nothing gets in, even at a cellular level. So that's, we're talking about then inflammation has come in, and low-grade inflammation, and there's a constant breakdown at that point. So if you're feeling a certain way and perceiving the world a certain way from this allostatic load and constantly in this fear-based response, subconsciously you've trained the body that way, the body's become that familiar with it. So it doesn't really matter how well you're eating or how well you're doing things. If you're constantly in that place, it ain't getting in, right? And then we start to have breakdown over time. So for me, and meditation is just the first step. If you are willing to sit down and overcome those feelings and overcome that thinking, because we ultimately, if you start looking at us and metacognition, we are not our thoughts. We are not our feelings. We are beyond that, and we can observe that. And then we're able to bring a different level of curiosity into what's going on, but it's really hard because the body has become so dependent on the way we think and the way we feel because we produce chemicals that continue to produce that response. And for me, that's why meditation is so important, because if you're willing to sit down in silence and not distract yourself and start to learn how to overcome what's going on, and it's bloody hard at first. Right? And there's so many different techniques and different ways of doing it and that. But as you start to overcome that, you start to learn about yourself. You're willing to go there and go the distance where people aren't. And from that space, because you're not constantly having information input in, you're able to then go within and start to see it. And then all of a sudden, it becomes an inside job. And then from that, you start to take ownership. You start to take ownership of yourself. You start to take responsibility for yourself. You start to take responsibility for your actions. And you can start to cultivate a strength that comes from the inside out. And that's a game changer. So as we then start to do that, we start waking up, we start to become more conscious. And then we start making more conscious decisions. We start to go, oh, maybe I shouldn't eat that right now. Or maybe I can reflect upon the way I spoke to that person today and I was a bit of a dick. And I responded because something is upsetting me, because I'm struggling to pay this bill or whatever it might be.
Reactions, yeah.
Yeah, and then from there we really start to bring that power back to ourselves, and you're actually affecting the nervous system, and you can actually get this work, I believe, to a point where instead of running from 70% or 20% of the hormones of stress, you can actually do it the other way around, where you're running from 78% to the hormones of joy and love and gratitude. And then you don't want for anything external to fill the empty hole, because you're already feeling whole and complete from the inside. So, and then because you're not wanting for that, because you're already content, more things start to flow your way, and you start to get out of these stressed responses, and you really start to see the world in a different lens over time. And when you get to that point, it is so beautiful. And it's so powerful and I've got to remind myself, I don't walk around like Buddha every day, mate. Right? But I'm really learning how to enjoy the journey, as well as the shit that gets thrown at me, and as well as striving for a better future. But I always bring it back to today. I always try and bring it back to
that is
now is what we have right now, this conversation, the things that are there. And
how do you stop the striving, like as a high performance, and I've asked this to a couple of people lately, because it's obviously something that I'm working through. When you're a high performance person, you've always pushed the limits, you're always going for it, and you're constantly pushing more out of yourself, getting that last inch, running that, 1 more kilometer, running, pushing harder, fighting more, getting that next bit. And you have that's your paradigm that you work from. If I work harder, I fight harder, I never give up, I push through boundaries. How do you bring that back so that you can still enjoy the actual where you are now, instead of being constantly in the future, which is something I tend to do? I know that I tend to be always looking to the goal, to the vision, and I create amazing results in some areas, like incredible things, but at the expense of the now, and at the expense of sometimes joy and relaxation and just happiness in the now.
It's the golden ticket, right?
I haven't worked that one out yet.
But I believe that we self-analyze ourselves all the way back through our lives, we end up having trained behaviors, and they become so familiar to us, and the way we feel the moment we step out of that feeling of that striving, that we've probably made an association that if I do this, it's going to allow me to feel fulfilled. My self-worth goes up and it's more significant, but that's all going on subconsciously, and we're actually there's a feeling within the body that we have got accustomed to. Now if we don't do that, and we're not at that element of striving, then there's an element of maybe guilt. Mm-hmm. But even if we have guilt, that has to produce a hormone or produce a chemical to produce a feeling of guilt. Mm. So there's a chemical response going on there. Or if we feel shame or lack of self-worth or whatever these emotional states are, the body is accustomed to it feeling that way too. So all of a sudden we end up, if we're not striving, we're then in an unknown. And we don't know how to deal with that unknown because it's unknown. It's new to us. Mm. We don't know how to sit with it. So to answer your question, that's why meditation can become so powerful, is because you're learning to sit in these uncomfortable states.
Yeah.
You're learning to have a relationship with how your body is. So instead of striving, which is keeping us distracted, or us away from these feelings that we might not have dealt with at some deeper level.
Very much, yeah.
We're not running from them. All of a sudden, we're aware that, hey, if I keep striving for this, it's only keeping me more distracted for this, because when I get to this and I've achieved this, I'm on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And then I'm on to the next thing. Right? So then we're actually pulling in this relationship with the self, and that's the work. That's the beauty of this work. And as you start to break down those states of being, and you start to overcome them, the body, because the body holds memory, right? And it starts to release, and you move in energy from one form into another, and it dissipates, and the charge dissipates with it. So you end up in these things where you go, actually, I feel content. Yeah. I feel good right now. I'm not. Life's good right now. This is good, and you can kind of go, you know what? I'm not going to do that tomorrow. I'm going to enjoy my time, this extra half hour with this person at the coffee shop right now, instead of moving on to the next thing and then the next thing. We run. Yeah. But we have to do the work. We've really got to train the body, and I like to hit it from both angles from at the beginning, and that's to have a meditation practice, and then during the day is do another small meditation from a gratitude practice, going into the heart, and then as you marry them up, you're taming the wild stallion that runs riot all the time, and as you overcome that, your states start to change. And that's just the beginning of this stuff, because then, like the stuff what we were talking about earlier, you can start to get deeper with it then. But you've got to break those states.
The cycle of, I've been visiting a psychologist for the last few weeks. When we lost our baby 3 months ago, I decided.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and I decided, I've never been to a psychologist before, but I think I need to do something, because the grief, and I didn't want to internalize it and become a problem somewhere in my life. And I've had, quite a few traumas in my life. Big stack. Most of us have, but I've had some whoppers. And she's been teaching me about the internal family system, which has been an interesting concept. This has been developed by, I forget the doctor's name now, but you have different parts of your personality. So this is not schizophrenia. So that we all have different parts of our personality. We have things like the critic, that might have been the parent or the teacher or the whoever it was in your life, the partner who's always telling you should have done this, and he's the one or she's the one that's always very critical of you and pushing you hard and is concerned with how you show up in the world. Mm-hmm. And their job, they have a positive job, but they can become out of control. And then you might have the fireman, and the fireman's job in your mind is to stop you feeling anything. So anytime you start to have these emotions that have been trapped somewhere because you haven't processed them, say that, in our case, death of a baby, or something horrific that's happened to you and you haven't processed it, then the fireman, every time those feelings start to come up and you get triggered by something, then he'll come out and start putting the fire out by doing things like making you work harder, or go and eat that chocolate, or going down a bottle of wine, or, go run 1,000,000 miles, which is one I used a lot in the past. And his job is really to distract you so that you don't do that deep work, because they're scared of that memory, that emotion coming out and being uncontrollably too intense for you. So his job is to keep the fire down, if you like. But that in itself becomes a problem. So she gets it to you. The psychologist has got me looking at the different aspects within myself. I have a very, very strong critic, she said, who's telling me, you should be the best at this, and you should be achieving that, and you should have had this by now, and why haven't you done that? And you're responsible for the world, and anybody's pain is your pain, and this sort of behaviour. Yeah. And I've said to her, look, this is great in one way, because you achieve an awful lot. You do some horrifically big things, but it can also have a very detrimental effect because you never turn off, you never relax, you never recover. You know, any weakness is seen as, you know, being weak, and that's not okay. You're not allowed to be weak. You're not allowed to be vulnerable. All of those sort of things. So it's been interesting to examine these from an observer's point of view, these parts of your personality, and she gets you to try to speak. What is it that the critic's wanting to do? Why is he there? What's his job? You know, he's obviously trying to protect you in some way. But it's a very interesting process to go through and to start to understand, so that's, you know, because we often, you know, people will say to me, you know, say things like, oh, would you like to go to the movies or something? And you go, well, a part of me would like to go, but the other part of me doesn't. And this is the thing that's going on, the conflict that's going on constantly in our heads. Part of you does want to, and the other part's going, but you should be doing your homework, or you should be going for that run. So it's understanding the roles of those different people in your head, if you like, and then how to work through those and how to work it out of the system, so to speak. So I mean, it's all different approaches for the same goal of, you know, getting to a place of more joy, of more gratitude, of more self-acceptance, of self-love, and still, and this is the hard bit, and still achieving great things and not missing your entire potential, you know.
Totally.
I think one of the biggest fears I have is not having the bigger impact in the world as I want to have, and getting to the end of my days and going, well, what did you achieve? And you're going, well, you know, I didn't really push myself. I didn't really do much or something. That would be, for me, you know, not an outcome that I want. And therefore you're constantly in this state of striving. So it's a really hard balancing act. And
it's a hard balance, but there's things that I question as well is, do we need to work harder to achieve more? You know, and that's something that I've kind of started to lean into and look at as well. And maybe if I'm trusting my intuition more and leaning into how I feel, and if this, what I was talking about earlier, is true, and is true to me, it doesn't need to be, that's my experience. Everybody's experience is different. But as I can start to lean in and look at that more, if I feel and trust and have a courage, then maybe I can achieve the same results or even more results by not working as hard, because I might have a belief that I have to work extremely hard just to get a bit of a result.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and it's not to say I shy away from hard work. Far from it. When I'm on. Like I go hard. Like when I run my retreat in a few weeks, you know, for 4 days, I'm just going to be, I'll probably not sleep. Seriously, you know, but so there's these elements, and it's fine as I find these states, you start to have a deeper connection with the self, and you start to play around with this more, and you start to go, maybe that's actually a belief. I've equaled this to be true, but is that true?
Yeah.
That's the greatest question I think we can ask ourselves. What is this real right now? Our feelings can feel like life or death sometimes. Yeah. And all we're trying to do is avoid a certain way to feel, which, looking back, blows my mind, because that was me for 30 odd years. But if we learn to sit with them and explore them and actually go and even name them,
yes.
Go, there's my anxiety, there's my, you know, like, just like the person say, like, so you have all these things going on, but becoming the observer is a skill. And I think it's one of the greatest skills that you can have, because as we unravel the self more and more, you know, each day is made up of just subconscious choices generally, or conscious choices depending on, and we generally we tend to stick to the same choices and patterns quite often, because that's how that equals that, so I'm going to do that. Yeah. But as we learn to look at this work more, and we can start making very conscious choices with thought behind them more, as opposed to that automated response from the critic, from the fireman, from whoever. Yeah. And then we interject and we start breaking the cycles. And then we can start to bring new meaning into an old meaning or incident or whatever might have happened or occurred.
Yeah, and we can start to create new stories and new beliefs and break free of those. Yeah, because, like I think we're all sort of trained, or most of us are trained that, you've got to work hard to succeed, and that the harder you work, the more you will succeed. And that is definitely not always the case, Not that you can be lazy and succeed, because you won't.
No, absolutely. No, sitting on the car, and I think as well, you kind of get momentum both ways. And, if there's always a debt to pay off, I think as well. So, like if you've been eating a crappy diet for 15 years and you've consciously just gone, what have I been doing? It takes time to shift that from one side to the other. It's just we all we've done is shifted our awareness. Or learn something more about so we perceived it one way and now I'm starting to perceive it the other. Like, it will take effort and work, but as you learn this work more and more, you can kind of really start to hone in on the things that really matter, I think. And a lot of that comes into what our heart desires and what we want. I mean, if you stop people, if you I always question, well, what is it I really want when I look back at the end of my life? I know it's to know I've loved deeply and connected and being a good person, like strong values. But yet we can kind of skip all that in the state of just striving.
Yeah. Or it's the bank account, or how big your house is, or how
yeah. I can tell you a quick story. When I was just starting 180 and I was in this cusp, I was in a lot of debt because of the stock trading, and for 3 years I just couldn't get out of this hole. And I had to accept being in my 30s, not in a great place, where I had friends around me, with me, that were financially set for life in their 30s. And my self-worth was really small at this point. And there was a great big hill in Coogee, and all I had was a push bike to get around in. 5 days a week I'd cycle this thing. I'd be in and out of the city from the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and there's this really steep hill. And I used to tutty down as low as I could get to get as much speed as I could, and I could smell the ocean breeze, and it was just hitting me. And it would be quite often late at night, and I would love this because there was no one on the road, and I used to imagine it was a red Ducati. Right? And I'd be like going as far, and I was like, oh, imagine what this would feel like and be a red Ducati. So when 180 got to the Business Telstra Awards, and what do you think I went and bought?
A Ducati.
A red Ducati. Now, after a week or two, that Ducati was nice, but it still didn't fulfill. It didn't fulfill me in that, and it was like, I've achieved this goal now. Wow, I actually spent years and years and years dreaming of this day. Yeah. Like years, and I know. Trust me, I know what it was like to suffer with
no money. Yeah.
No money and not much going on, and I have my girlfriend walk out at me after 18 months, and just everything implode. And then I had these elements, and I'm like, I'm actually not that much happier. So what is it like? And that's the question. Like that's where the investigation needs to go and the inquiries need to go. And having that context was an extremely valuable lesson for me. Because it's allowing me to slow that strive, that thing. Yes, absolutely. I'd love to live, I live in a great place and it's beautiful and everything, but those experiences have taught me a lot of what really matters. And because I've had that experience, it brings new meaning and gives me context.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we need to go through the hardships in life. So years from now, like one of the best sayings I've ever heard, a memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. Right? So we can start to have that wisdom and look back upon our life and bring it different meaning, and all these experiences, I look at them now as just an opportunity for us to start to grow in different ways and look at it And if we are in the present moment, if we are here right now, then if we're striving for something, that means we're not here right now.
Yeah.
We're not embracing this moment. And of course, we live in the Western world. There's a reality to it, but I think there's a dance. There's something magical. And as you learn to work with this work more, it becomes more of your own reality over that time.
So you're not wishing your life away to get to that point and then getting there, like with your red Ducati, and going, well, that wasn't actually that didn't fulfill me like I thought it would fulfill me. The material don't. I mean, I think there's a certain level that we all need our needs met. We need to be able to get out of debt. We need to be, have a roof over our heads and warmth and clothes to wear and, a few nice things and stuff. But we don't. And I think if they're not being met, then you're very, very desperate and you're going to do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Beyond that, though, just being motivated by money for money's sake, I don't think that actually leads to very much. I don't think it leads to much personal growth at all. I think it might, a big bank account might be nice. What it does equal often is freedom to have the time to be able to, to search for because you're not in that survival state all the time, which is a very hard state to be in. And I've certainly been there. I lost everything at 38, lost my business, my husband, the country I was living with, came back to New Zealand at 38 with zero, back at square one, moved into mum and daddy's spare bedroom again and rebuilt my life again. And so I know what it's like to lose everything and to have nothing. But I think just striving for money's sake isn't the answer. And material stuff isn't going to make us happy beyond the existing, beyond the actual survival stuff. I mean, if you're fighting for food and you haven't got enough to feed your children or whatever, you're going to fight like crazy.
Of course.
You're going to get. But when you get to a certain level, then it's not going to be the only motivating factor. So, well, Guy, I think we've gone everywhere in this podcast once again, as I knew we would, and I'd like to have another conversation with you maybe in 6 months' time, and just see where our learnings have taken us, because this is really a conversation between two students of the world, and the latest in technology and the latest in neuroscience and the latest in heart math and all of these amazing things. It's not like we've got the answers to everything.
Totally.
But I think if people were to take, say, a few things away from today, what would you want them to go and do? I mean, meditation, obviously, but tell us a little, if you gave me 3 key learnings from today, if I put you on the spot, what would they be? If you want
I think start a gratitude practice, and don't just do it in theory, like really embody it and feel it, and start sending a very different signal to every cell in your body. Because the nervous system is a filter, like we said, to the way you perceive everything. And that's going to teach you to start cultivating emotions and feelings from the inside out, and not stop waiting for an external circumstance to fulfill your needs and make you be happy. Because if you're doing that, then right now you're coming from a place of lack, I believe.
Yeah.
So, and if you're always coming from a place of lack, then how much is ever going to be enough? So I would say start practicing that. If people want to practice that, I have a free meditation. It's 7 minutes long.
Yeah, where do we get that?
Yeah, just back on my website, guylawrence.com.au. And they can just download that and start practicing breathing into the heart every day and going through that. And do it when you most don't want to do it, because that means it's really going to interrupt your stress responses, So that's that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do that would be really practical, is maybe have Post-it notes or something inspiring littered around where you spend most of your time. It could even be the question is this real right now? So we run 95% of the day from the subconscious. And we're always in an automated behavior, honestly. Even our thoughts are generally repetitive daily. And according to the model of psychology, over 70% of them are negative. So we constantly talk to ourselves a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself is to really start to inquire if it's true or not. How are you talking to yourself? How are you making yourself feel? Are you putting yourself down a lot? Are you being hard or self-critical on yourself? Is that the truth? Is that necessary? I'm sure there's other people in your life that would see you very differently and see the potential and the beauty and the truth of who you really are, you know, but do you see that yourself? So I would start to then just be aware of that. And like I said, if you can have mental cues littered everywhere, it's going to remind you, am I conscious right now, or am I just running on subconscious patterns?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And then thirdly, my suggestion would be, you know, even if I've said things that might stretch your beliefs, your imagination, whether you think it's, you know, right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It's all our individual journey. And I think one of the greatest gifts I've given myself is that beginner's mind, is to try and have a childlike curiosity to things and stop acting and behaving like I know it all.
Yeah.
You know, and the next time you hear something that challenges your current status quo, your current behavior, instead of reacting a certain way and dismissing it, maybe sit with it for a while and inquire about it and look at it. Because we can look for evidence, positive or negative, in anything. And we generally look for the evidence on the way we're actually feeling fundamentally underneath.
Yeah.
So inquire about that too. And maybe do something different. Maybe look at something different. Maybe listen to something different. Maybe shake up your routine a bit, and maybe have a beginner's mind for a while.
Be curious.
What's there to lose? Would you rather be happy or right? You know, and these days I just want to be happy.
Yeah, and I'm going back to being a child sometimes. I think, you know, having time for play and having time to be just stupid and not have...
We don't have to take it all so serious, you know?
Being adults for 5 minutes.
Yeah, and then if you want to go really deep with this stuff and go all in, and there's plenty of things. Like I said, we do retreats and all sorts, so... And an online program as well. Yeah.
GuyLawrence.com.au. So Lawrence is spelled Lawrence. GuyLawrence.com.au is where you can find out about your retreats and all the work you do. You also have a 4-week program online that where you work with people, and you know, people can check that out. And you do an awful lot of work around this area. And I'm hoping, Guy, that one day we get to work together in some way, shape or form at some seminar or some, I don't know, whatever it'll be. But the universe will decide for us and tell us what we're doing. But I just wanted to thank you for today. It's been fantastic to connect with you. Thanks again to Kerwin for inadvertently connecting us. This is funny how synchronicity happens, right? You
totally
go down one path and that leads to that person, and then it's just bizarre. It's amazing. And your work and what you do and the vibe that you put out in the world is just fabulous, guys. So thank you very much for being on the show today.
Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.